All right, I did get some email questions, and I'm not going to answer all of the email questions in one fell swoop, but there were a couple I wanted to specifically address tonight. And one of them that I thought is important is, what does Roman Rite mean? Because I guess I've referenced the Roman Rite. So in the Catholic Church, the great majority of us Catholics are what we call Roman Rite Catholics, which means that we celebrate the liturgy according to the Roman Rite. We also have 21, I think it is, Eastern churches that are in communion with Rome that are other rites, like the Byzantine Rite or the Armenian Rite, and so forth and so on. So even though we're one of 21 or 22, we're the vast majority numerically speaking. So that's the Roman Rite Church. Is there still a Patriarch of Constantinople? Yes. There are still Orthodox and Eastern churches? Yes. Or do you call sisters or nuns? It depends. So active sisters in the world are called sisters. If you're a closed and cloistered convent, you're called a nun. So the Dominican sisters are sisters, not nuns. But if you're enclosed in a Carmelite monastery as a woman religious, then you're formally a nun. So technically that's the difference. Is it Father Mark or Father Beckman? I answer to both. It's my first and last name. Most people call me Father Mark, but I'm not offended by anything. Just don't call me a curse word. Right? Do Catholics acknowledge or think much about the feminine aspect of God? I may say a bit more about that tonight. But in the book of Genesis, when it says God created humans, male and female, God created them in the divine image and likeness. That means that that both men and women reflect the image and likeness of their Creator. So each in their own unique ways. So God transcends, we'll say a lot more about that this evening, God transcends human sexuality. So it's not inappropriate to call God she, even. So now the Son of God became a man, so we say he for the second person of the Trinity once he became incarnate. But the predominant use of pronouns in the biblical tradition is the male pronoun, but God transcends human sexuality. God, in God's essence before the incarnation, is neither male nor female, but is greater than those things. The word for spirit in Hebrew actually is a feminine tense. So sometimes the Holy Spirit, you could say her or she when you're speaking about the Spirit of God. So I was with another priest at St. Matthew, and I said something about she, referring to the Holy Spirit. He said, it's he, but that's he. And I said, it doesn't matter. Okay, one other thing too, and I referenced, by the way, that in reference to the sexual abuse crisis that's happening in the Catholic Church, that, the Catholic Church isn't going to be reflective of the human world, so we're not going to be a place that's devoid of sinners. Every form of sin that's present out in the world beyond us is also present in the church, so you're not going to find in this world a perfect place. But the question that was addressed to me, though, is, in addition to those who were abusers, what about the fact that those who were responsible for, in a sense, overseeing, the bishops, those in the structure of the church, failed to protect children? And is this not an institutional issue? And my answer would be, yes, it is an institutional issue that has to be addressed. So the two questions are, what do you do with abusers? The second question is, how do you address the protection of children in such a way that those who have the responsibility of ensuring the safety of the community are in fact protected? And I will also add that the United States bishops in this country in 2002 developed what's called the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young Adults. And it set in place protocols to protect children across the United States. And since that charter has been instituted, it's been highly effective. What do I mean by highly effective? Well, if you read the report from Pennsylvania about the 1,000 children who were abused by priests and the 300 abusers, since 2002, there have been 5 that were caught. And all 5 of them were reported to the civil authorities and processed exactly like the charter says they should be. So before and after 2002, there has been a shift in the way that this is being addressed in the United States. And there was already some change taking place prior to that time. I was looking at the statistics. The 1960s, 1970s were the peak of the numerical crisis in terms of abuse. It began to fall off in 1984. And so the numbers have been going down since that point. There are 2 problems with the charter. One is it only applies in the United States of America, and there are those who are saying it needs to apply worldwide. And it also only applied to priests, and something needs to be done institutionally and structurally, and this has to come from Rome to be certain that priests and bishops are also held to the same level of accountability. So Pope Francis has invited the heads of the world's bishops' conferences to Rome in February. My suspicion is that he's drawing them for a reason, and he is going to be seeking to implement some type of an institutional response on a worldwide level to this. So, any questions about that? Because I know this is huge right now in the news, and has been for about 6 weeks. Our bishop, by the way, is going to be visiting 4 major parishes in the diocese to do listening sessions, and he has selected St. Henry as one of the 4, so he will be here on Sunday. I think is the 14th of October a Sunday? If it is, I think it's the 14th of October at 3:30 in the afternoon. That will probably be here in the fellowship hall, but we'll advertise that, so. All right, any other questions about that, or any questions in general? All right, tonight's topic is the mystery of God. And someone once said, the God that you know and understand is not God. And by that, the person meant anything that we know and understand that our human minds can capture is smaller than the human mind. God is greater. So any God that you can know and understand is not God. It's what you have captured so far in your limited human thinking about the mystery of God. And Augustine, I think it was, and I think Deacon Greg quoted this or paraphrased it in one of his homilies, was along the Mediterranean Sea, and the story was told about this child trying to put the water of the sea into the hole in the sand, and he was carrying bucket by bucket to try to fill it up with the water. And the observation made was it would be easier to put all the water of the sea into that hole in the sand than to put the mystery of God into the human brain. So God is mystery, and when we say God is mystery, we mean by that, we also say God is an absolute mystery, that even in heaven, when we have what we call the beatific vision, when we're face to face with the mystery of God, God will still remain mystery. So we will know God more fully than we know Him in this life, but never will the human mind fully capture the mystery of God. I always say, by the way, and I think I mentioned this last week, that should not surprise us, because even other human beings that we know very well remain a mystery to us. And we may remain a mystery to ourselves as well. And God is so much greater than that, so how could we possibly ever hope to fully understand the mystery of God? So, I want to start tonight with, there is in sacred scripture what I like to call, there are these pivotal moments when God reaches out to touch the human person. And when God does that, things happen. And I want to share one of those profound moments of encounter with you. This comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 3. Meanwhile, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. Leading the flock across the desert, he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in fire flaming out of a bush. As he looked on, he was surprised to see that the bush, though on fire, was not consumed. So Moses decided, I must go over to look at this remarkable sight and see why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw him coming over to look at it more closely, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. God said, Come no nearer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place you stand is holy ground. I am the God of your father, he continued, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. This moment of encounter comes up at a pivotal moment in Moses' life. If you know a little bit about the story of Moses, he grew up in the land of Egypt, where the Hebrews, the Apiru, God's beloved people, were enslaved. Moses, as an infant, narrowly escaped death. So when the mother gave birth to the Hebrew children, Pharaoh had ordered them to be murdered. But his mother put him in a little basket, a little ark, and set him out on the Nile River. And it was the daughter of Pharaoh. God does have a sense of humor, don't you think? It was the daughter of Pharaoh who found the baby and wanted to take care of the baby and raise it. So that's what she did. And she chose Moses' own mother to be the nursemaid for the child. And she raised Moses, and Moses was raised with power and wealth as the son of Pharaoh in the court. And one day, Moses went out and he saw one of the Egyptians abusing a Hebrew slave. And something rose up in Moses. I like to call it a righteous anger. And Moses killed the Egyptian and buried the body. The next day, he comes out and he sees two of the Hebrew slaves fighting each other. And he says to them, you're members of the same people, basically. Why are you doing this to your own kin? Why would you do this to each other? And at that moment, one of them says, you killed that Egyptian yesterday. We're going to report you, kind of thing. The fear of it rose up in Moses' mind and heart. So what did Moses do? This great, and he has this greatness about him. He's willing to stand up for the innocent, but he's afraid. And he flees Egypt. And he ends up there in Midian, and he just decides, I'm just going to live a kind of quiet life. But when you're a certain kind of person, you can't live a quiet life. And when he arrives there, he sees the shepherds and this poor woman not being able to water her flocks, and he goes over to help her, and he ends up getting married to her. So you know how these things happen. But his sense of innate justice is still part of who he is. So he's escaped from Egypt. He's out in this desert watching over the flocks, and while he's just doing his ordinary stuff, he sees this brilliance in this bush, and he's like, what is this? And he's drawn to it. So Rudolf Otto, I think it is, the great German philosopher of religion, speaks about the holy, the mystery of God, the numinous, he calls it, as being both attractive, but also fearful. So tremendum et fascinans. It's fascinating, it draws us to it, but there's something about it that is awe-inspiring. The best way I can describe that multiple set of feelings is if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, you get to the edge of the rim, there's something about it that draws you right to the edge. You kind of want to be drawn to the beauty of it, but there's something about it that's so immense and huge you're at the same time overawed by it. You realize, ooh, I dare not come too close to the edge of this thing or I'll fall in and never recover. And so Moses has this experience of the mystery of God. He's drawn to the burning bush. But you also heard the Lord say, come no nearer. You are standing on sacred ground. This is holy. And Moses takes off his shoes, and there is reverent before the face of God. So that awe-inspiring mystery. But let's listen further. And as you listen further, pay attention to the verbs. Try to capture all the verbs you hear. So Moses had hid his face. He was afraid to look at God. But the Lord said, I have witnessed the affliction of my people in Egypt, and have heard their cry of complaint against their slave drivers. I know well what they are suffering. Therefore, I've come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and lead them out of that land into a good and a spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the country of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So indeed, the cry of the Israelites has reached my ears. I've truly noted that the Egyptians are oppressing them. Come now. I will send you to Pharaoh to lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Or what did you notice about God here? Give me some verbs or some insights you had.
Witness. Witness.
All right, one word. I've witnessed the affliction of my people.
Heard.
I heard it. The cries reached my ears. Witnessed it. I've heard it. What other verbs? Sent. Oh, he will send Moses. So what we're learning from this, by the way, is God is a God of action. God is not what the deists believed in the 1800s, like a clockmaker who made the clock and left it running and disappeared, which a lot of people still live with that notion of God created the universe, now God is now off in heaven somewhere else, and he's not really here very much. You know, someday he'll come back again, but it's kind of like we're all on our own. Well, this is not the God of Revelation. It's not the God of the Hebrew Scriptures. This God is going to act. He's going to intervene in the course of human history, and he's going to act decisively. All right, so verbs. Let's go back to verbs. He's witnessed. He's heard. He noted it. He noted it. What else? I have seen the affliction. Sees, hears, witnesses, notes it, and he says, I know well what my people are suffering. The word know in Hebrew, yada, is the word for knowledge that is so intimate that when Genesis tells us that Adam knew his wife Eve, they had a child. So it's that type of intimate knowing. So God is a God who is not remote or distant, but God is intimately involved in the suffering of humanity. He sees what's going on. He hears it. He's paying attention. He notes it. He is aware. He knows it like a husband knows his wife or a wife knows her husband. This is a God who is intimately aware and involved in the human story, especially in the story of those who are suffering. That's what we're learning by this encounter. And God not only is aware of this, so what word would you use in English to describe that kind of knowing of the suffering of another human being? Empathy is an okay word for it. You're suffering with the other person. There's another word I even like better than empathy. Empathy is good. Compassion, yeah. When you have compassion for another human being, you suffer with them. So this is a God of compassion, we would say. There's a Hebrew word for this, and the Hebrew word is God is a God of hesed. It gets translated in English a lot of different ways. Poorly, sometimes I think translated as pity. God has pity on his people. Sometimes as mercy. Sometimes as love. It's heartfelt compassion, tenderness, heartfelt mercy. So when you're walking down the street and you see another human being that's wounded and you're immediately moved to compassion to reach out, or you hear your child crying and you want to go comfort them, that type of being moved on the inside, that's hesed. So God is a God of hesed, heartfelt mercy, tender compassion is a good way of describing it. There's another great word that get used in Hebrew a lot in the Hebrew scriptures. God is hesed and emet. Often translated, God is true, but not true in the sense of a Greek understanding that it's the truth. It's true like a friend is true to you and will not abandon you no matter what, faithful and true. So if you can think of the person in your life that you think, no matter whatever happened to me in my life, this person would never abandon me, that's the kind of quality that emet represents. True fidelity, faithfulness. I will never abandon you. So these two qualities, hesed and emet, in the Old Testament are the most frequent adjectives that describe how God is in relationship to his people. So God is a God of heartfelt mercy, tender compassion, and he's going to be faithful and true. So is this the kind of God who begins to make himself known to Moses here? Is that what you're picking up on in this dramatic encounter? Yes. So now, what do you think Moses is going to say? Oh, don't send me. I'm not fit for that job. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? What did God answer? I will be with you. This shall be your proof that it is I who sent you. When you bring my people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this very mountain. That doesn't sound very comforting to Moses, right? Because you're going to come back here and worship me. Well, that's kind of a future thing. Wait a minute, how do I know you're going to be with me in that moment? But Moses said, when I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, if they ask me, what is his name, what am I to tell them? Why is Moses asking for the name of God? Anybody have any clues? Yeah, when you know somebody, you know their name. Anybody ever been a teacher in a classroom? And when you're a teacher and you know the kid's name, and he stands up to do something, you say, John, sit back down. Boom, you have instant control over that student. If you're a substitute teacher and you walk in the room and you don't know the kids by name and they start doing something, you're like, wait a minute, you over there, you don't have power over them. So when you know the name, you have some power. So what Moses is trying to do is to get some power over this encounter with the mystery of God. He doesn't want to do this, and he's trying to get some control over it. But remember when the Lord God formed all the creatures in the Garden of Eden, he gave each of them a name. He gave Adam the ability to name the creatures. So the ability to name something gives you a certain degree of power over it. So Moses says, what is your name? He wants to know this mystery that he's encountering. He wants to know what this mystery is all about. Listen to the answer of God, by the way. God replied, this is an English translation, but I am who I am. Then he added, this is what you shall tell the Israelites, I am sent me to you. The Hebrew can also be in the future tense. I am who I am, and it could also mean I will be who I will be. So what kind of an answer is that? Without further qualification. So Greek philosophical understanding of that term and early Christian tradition will indeed precisely interpret it that way. Being, God is being itself, not a particular being among other beings, but being itself. But here in the Hebrew text, it may mean even more rudimentarily, it may mean simply Moses. I am who I am and I'll be who I will be. In other words, you're not going to control this encounter. I am God, not you. So what we call the holy mystery of God, or a philosophical word, God's transcendence remains intact. Did you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis? So the Christ figure is Aslan the lion, and at one point I think the statement is made, oh, this is not a tame lion that you're dealing with. So you're not going to tame the mystery of God here. So God is always greater. It was kind of like the first time I was driving in my car in Seattle. It had been cloudy when I arrived. I'm going across the George Washington Bridge, and I look over my shoulder on my left, and all of a sudden the skies have opened up. I hadn't been aware of it. And Mount Rainier was there. It's huge. It's so big it covers the whole mountain. The whole sky, it seems like. I almost wrecked the car. It was such a dramatic mountain. It's like, where did that come from? And it's like 30 miles or 60 miles away or something. So, so that sense of God's greatness here cannot be claimed. The transcendent mystery of God remains intact. I will also add, by the way, in the entire Old Testament, there is no one who is closer to God than Moses. Throughout the Old Testament, it will say, no one can see the face of God and live. But in other places, it says Moses used to speak to God face to face, like one friend to another. And indeed, Moses alone will go up to the top of the mountain to receive the 10 words from God. The people of Israel are to remain behind a safe boundary. It's lightning and thunder and storm. So Moses has this intimacy with God that is almost unparalleled in the Old Testament. And at one point Moses says, show me your face. And the Lord hides the face of Moses, and God goes by and he kind of sees the backside of God disappearing. So even though this profound intimacy develops between Moses and Moses will speak up to God, why should you abandon this people that you rescued from the land of Egypt? So God will have this very honest relationship with God, but even so, God remains a transcendent mystery. Now, you think that might give Moses enough of an answer to say, yes, God? No, absolutely not. He says, he goes on to talk about how all these things, but Moses objected, suppose they will not believe me or listen to my plea. They may say, the Lord did not appear to you. And then the Lord gives him a sign, a staff in the hand that he can turn into a snake, which he will use. And then also he turns his hand to leprosy. He gives him a couple of signs that he can use to let him know, hey, you got what you need. Moses, however, said, Lord, if you please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor recently, nor now that you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. You picked the wrong fellow for this job. The Lord said to him, who gives one, who gives the other, and so forth. And he's going to send him a helper. Aaron's going to help him. But Moses says, if you please, Lord, send someone else. So the Lord became angry with Moses and said, have you not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he's an eloquent speaker. So in the end, God says, go. And Moses goes. And you know the rest of the story. So God will use Moses in a very powerful way. What does this tell us about the mystery of God? It tells us that God is transcendent, holy, but he is also what we call immanent. What does immanent mean? It means that God is closer than we are to ourselves. So God has become, and especially in the incarnation from a Christian perspective, God has become so united with us that he has a deeper communion with us than we even have with ourselves. So God remains both transcendent and immanent, close to his people, yet infinite mystery all at once. That's the great mystery of God. God reveals God's self in the Old Testament. Now, we Christians, by the way, we believe that God has taken on a whole new partnership with humanity in the New Testament. So we see God as a partner to humanity. He's the senior partner, obviously. But he doesn't want to do this human adventure without us being with him in the process. So he includes us in this connection. That's why God doesn't go directly down to set the Israelites free, but he will work through Moses. He will work through Aaron. God will choose prophets to speak on his behalf. He will choose, not God's choice, but in response to God's people requesting it, he will choose kings for Israel. So God has this way of connecting with human beings. Now the preeminent point of that, I'm going to flip forward to the Gospel of John. Here we are at the very beginning of the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word. In the book of Genesis, when God begins creation, how does God create? He speaks the Word. God says, "Let there be light," and there is light. So in the beginning, John says, was the Word. The Word was in God's presence, and the Word was God. He was present to God in the beginning, and through that Word all things came into being. Apart from him, nothing came to be. Whatever came to be in him found life. Life for the light of humanity. The light shines on in the darkness, a darkness that did not overcome it. He was in the world, and through him the world was made, yet the world did not know who he was. To his own he came, yet his own did not accept him. And he who did accept him, he empowered to become children of God. And here we come. This is the pivotal moment in Christian understanding. The Word that was in the beginning, the Word that was with God, the Word that was God. And here in verse 14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Literally, he has pitched his tent among us. On our men's retreat that we had a few weeks ago, I invited the men at the beginning of the retreat the first time. I said, imagine yourself camping with God. He's in the tent with you. That's the intimacy of God with us, humans. He's made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of an only Son coming from the Father, filled with enduring love. Of his fullness we have all had a share, love following upon love. For while the law was given through Moses, this enduring love came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, ever in the Father's bosom, who has revealed him. So the intimacy, the Son in the bosom of the Father, coming forth from the Father, taking on flesh, humanity, incarnate by the Virgin Mary, we say in the Creed. He is now one of us. He has connected humanity to himself in a whole new way. We will say at Christmas, heaven and earth are now wed, they're joined together. So God has now entered into creation itself, has become part of the human story. He has become fully one with us, fully human in every way that you and I are, except for sin. So this great mystery of a God who is infinite, pre-existing all creation, greater than all creation sustained by God, has now entered into the very fabric of this world. He's become one with us. Why does God choose to do such a thing? The final answer is so that we can become one with God. There's a little prayer at Mass you may not have noticed, but when the bread and wine are brought to the altar, have you noticed that And we pour the wine into the chalices, and we take a little bit of water, and we mix the water in with the wine. And when we do that, we say a prayer along the lines of, by the mystery of this water and wine, may we come to share in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity. So for us Christians, of course, this is the supreme moment of revelation. So someone, Father Bolso had to go to Father Ryan last week or the week before. The students and Father Ryan asked questions and the priest can go answer them. And one of the questions was, how do we know that Christianity is the right religion for us? And Father Bolso was talking with me about it. And my answer was, well, look at all the beliefs about God in the world today. If you look at all the different ways that God is described by people, if we Christians believe that Jesus, which we say in the Creed, is God from God, light from light, true God from true God, if we believe he really is the face of God incarnate in our world, then that means that if we look at the face of Jesus and we look at who he is, how he lived and died and rose, what he said and did, his heart, his mind, the way he interacts, if we believe that that is the clearest revelation of God that humanity has ever had or ever will have, then we know what the heart of God looks like. All we have to do is look at the heart of Jesus. And Jesus says that, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. If you know me, you have known the Father. And remember the background of the words know, Yada. If you know me that intimately, then you also know my Father. I know I keep referring to it, but if you've seen that film, The Shack, the chief character encounters the three persons of God and says, well, which one of you is God? And all three answer together, I am. He says, you are? We are. Yeah, I am. This is kind of a moment of levity in the film at that point. But so here is, for us Christians, God becomes incarnate in the person of Jesus. So if we really believe that that's what God is like, then that's why we believe Christianity is the full revelation of God's truth to us. Now, as you all know, we also believe that the Holy Spirit is God. So in the end, we're moving now to the mystery of what we call the Trinity. That God is one God, yet three persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. And someone says, that too is an absolute mystery. In other words, we're never even going to fully understand that mystery, even in heaven. It's always going to be beyond the human ability to understand. So God the Father is God, God the Son is God, God the Holy Spirit is God, yet there is only one God who to be adored, worshipped, and glorified. Which also means that the very mystery of God itself is a communion of love between three persons who are yet one God. So the brain has a hard time understanding such a thing, rightly so. Thus, Augustine's reflection on this, the water and the hole in the sand. All right, so a lot of times when I start this reflection, I will ask the question, who is God to you? If you had to describe God, how would you describe God? Got some answers?
Father.
All right, God is Father. Other answers.
Love.
God is
Warmth.
warmth.
Love.
And love. The first thing.
Our Creator.
Creator.
Power. Infinite knowledge.
Power. Infinite knowledge, there's a word for that. In Latin, or it's now the English course, omniscience. Infinite knowing, all knowing.
Forgiving.
Forgiving.
Present.
present. Patient. Patient.
Friend.
Friend. Reminded of Jesus saying, I no longer speak of you as slaves, I call you friends. What else?
Funny.
Funny? He created me after all.
Truth.
Truth. No other ways that you connect with God, the mystery of God? Beauty.
Omnipotent.
Omnipotent? Is that what you said? So not just powerful, but all powerful. Omnipotent.
Mother.
Mother. Any other connections with God?
Powerful.
All right, powerful.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry.
No worries. We have power.
Redeemer.
And what?
Redeemer.
Redeemer. Another word for redeemer is savior. What else?
Wisdom.
Wisdom. That's similar to knowledge, but slightly different. I understand. Any others?
Protector.
Protector. If you're thinking of one you haven't said it, say it. Light. God is light. That's common in Scripture. God is light. In God there is no darkness. If you look at the Old Testament, we get lots of images, don't we, of God? God is our rock. God is our shepherd. God is our teacher. God is our shield, our place of refuge.
You may have noticed, by the way, when I was reading from Exodus, did you notice that sometimes the sacred text alternated between God and Lord? So the Lord saw Moses coming over, and God said, ... There's actually two strains of literature in the book of Genesis, at least. One is the Yahwistic source, it's often called, that uses the name Lord God to describe God. The other uses Elohim, or God, to describe God. The first creation story, which is the creation in 7 days with God kind of magnificently over the whole thing, is probably from the priestly source. There's a sacred character about it. It ends up on the seventh day, we need to rest. That's kind of a priestly concern. God is very sovereign and transcendent. He speaks, and it happens. You move into the second chapter of Genesis, and in the course of that chapter, the creation is described in a different sort of way, and it's called the Lord, Yahweh. He's closer to us. And there you have a story of creation where there's already the face of the earth and a river running in it, and you see God intimately involved in the human story. He gets down into the clay, and he scoops the clay out of the earth, and he breathes into the nostrils the breath of life, and it says man becomes a living being. And then the Lord God recognizes it's not good for the man to be alone, so he puts the man into a deep sleep, and from his side, from the rib, he draws forth and shapes a woman. And when Adam sees the first woman, he says, this one at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. So there's a much more intimate way that this writer presents the creation narrative. God is a potter. He has a breathing life in. He's doing surgery. He's planting a garden. So two strains of presentation. Well, with all these images, you can kind of see a balance of those two going back and forth. It's one thing to say, God is my Lord, my King. God is all-powerful. It's another to say, God is my friend. God is my helper. God is my tent mate. You know, if you use that image from John's Gospel. So we say about these things, classical theology says that what we do, we have this movement of human language and understanding that goes through 3 levels. The first way is called the positive way. So we as human beings, we don't have any choice. We pick a word or a phrase or an image and we try to describe something of the mystery of God. We say God is Father, God is rock, God is light, God is, this comes up in the Old Testament, God is the warrior, who defends his people. So we use all those images to describe words, language to describe the mystery of God. So we're making use of human concepts to the best of our ability to describe ultimate mystery. But classical theology says you have to go through a second movement, and the second movement is what we call the negative way. In the negative way, you almost have to deny everything you said. You have to say God is really not Father. God is really not rock. God is not light. God is not any of these things that we've written on the board, unless we've defined things like omnipotent, unless we have the word all, because nothing in this world is all something or other. So all of the language that we use about God, we go through a negative move to say, none of this stuff is completely true about God. In fact, you could also say God is darkness. Instead of God is rock, you could say God is water. God is wind or breath. So the images sometimes contrast with each other. This is important, by the way, because why is it important, for example, let's use the word Father. We want to say God is our Father. Why is it important also to say God is not our Father? Why is that an important thing? He's bigger than that. And to be honest, every single person in this room has different experiences of Father, don't we? And some of us have very kind, loving, wonderful fathers, and some have fathers that weren't quite so kind and loving. Some people have experienced fathers who were abusive. So when you use the language, God is Father, some people hear that and they don't want any part of God, because if God is like the Father I am thinking of, then I don't want any connection with that Father. And many of us have a father somewhere in between. He was neither perfect nor completely abusive, but he had a mixture of good and bad qualities at different points. And then it's kind of a mystery. Sometimes it feels okay to call God Father, and other times that is not fully positive. So that's the mystery of human language and even of human understanding. But we also have to go to a third movement, which is the eminent way. And in this way, we will say, God is truly Father, but not in any way that we humans regard fatherhood. God is so preeminently Father that no human father fully captures the true fatherhood of God. So God is Father in its full perfection, not in its limited human senses. So God is not light like the fluorescent lights above us or the halogen lights or whatever we've got these days. But God is light in a way that is unlike any other human light that we experience. So this protects, by the way, what we call the infinite mystery of God. So every bit of language that we use to describe the mystery of God in the end will fail us, and yet we have to speak about what matters to us, so we have to put it into words and try to capture the mystery to the best of our ability. So even though we'll never fully exhaust the mystery of God, God has revealed God's self to us, has become the Word made flesh, and because of that, we have to speak of God. We can't remain silent. That's sort of the end result. Well, I mean, okay. I had an entire semester graduate study in the mystery of God and His unity and Trinity that went on for 3 credit hours for a full semester, and I've tried to talk about the mystery of God in 60 minutes or less. I mean, what can you cover about the mystery of God in an hour, right? So, but hopefully I've got your brains thinking a little bit about who this God is in relationship to who we human beings are. And once you begin to think about that a bit and appreciate it, then something happens. I will also tell you that one of the greatest thinkers in 2,000 years who spent he was brilliant, much of his life studying the mystery of the faith, St. Thomas Aquinas, had written the Summa Theologia, the summary of theology, which has shaped theology ever since the last 800 years or so. One day he has this mystical experience, I would say a direct experience of the mystery of God, and he says, everything I've written is straw. So when you meet God, everything that you've said or heard about God suddenly evaporates. And that's what, by the way, mystics are people who have a direct, immediate experience of God. So when you have an immediate, direct experience of God, that's what the mystics claim, then you're not going to look for secondary descriptions about God. It reminds me of a story of this priest. He was doing his prayer book on the plane as he was flying the Liturgy of the Hours. And he was reading the Liturgy of the Hours. And all of a sudden they had some bad turbulence, and the plane started shaking a lot. And he said, I better pray. So as if he had not been praying before. But when you have when you're touched by God directly, the words that you use, it's hard to put that experience into words. Sometimes we are moved to silence, silent awareness. That's what we call the apophatic tradition of Christian mysticism. Okay, questions, observations, or thoughts? All right, I think we're going back to our tables. And are there questions there? All right, there's questions there, so enjoy.